Hey folks, alright, well I want to look at another data structure in Lisp this time around. This one's called hashes, and this is basically a lookup table, a hash table sort of arrangement. So it's pretty straightforward, well, until we get to the macro piece at the end, but most of the common hash table functionality is created. You can create a hash table, you can destroy one, you can add and remove key value pairs, you can check if a key is in there, you can get a list of keys, you can update the value associated with the key, you can look up the value associated with the key, all that kind of thing. So we'll just run through some basic syntax and play with this stuff a little. Probably won't spend a lot of time on this, but at least we can have a quick look at it. So basic idea is make hash table is the function to create and return a new empty table. So you can store that in a variable or do whatever, pass it off to a function, do whatever it is you want to do with that newly created hash table. There's a hash table count function that just tells you how many key value pairs are in it right now. And there's a gethash function where you give it the key that you're interested in and you give it the table you're interested in, and it returns the value associated with that key, or it returns nil if the key isn't found. Now, this works like quite similarly to the things like the nth and ELT and whatnot for sequences and lists and arrays, and where you can do a setf on your gethash and give it a new value. So that would update the value associated with that key. If there was no value associated with that key yet, it's inserting a new value in the table. You can go through and remove key value pairs. Again, you can look up the value associated with a key. One of the things that comes in, or that's a bit of a catch, is that when we go back and do our gethash here, look up the value associated with this key. Well, it returns nil if the key isn't in the table. But what if the key was in the table, but the value associated with it was nil? Right? We can't tell the two of them apart. So we need some way to figure out if the key is actually in there or not. So in fact, gethash actually returns two values. Remember when we talked about using values to return multiple values and things like nth value or multiple value bind to capture them? That's what we're going to do here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my call to gethash and pass it the key and the table. And I'm going to use multiple value bind and say, okay, capture the two values that gethash returns. So the first one it returns is the value or nil, and the second one is a true or false. True if it was in the table, false if it wasn't. So this way, in this block, in my multiple value bind block, I've got access to the v and the status that I grabbed. So here I'm going to say if the status is true, then I'll print, here's the value we found. And if the status wasn't true, if it came back with a nil, then we'll print out the message saying we didn't find it. So just something to keep in mind. The syntax for iterating through the keys is a little unusual compared to what we've seen in Lisp so far. So there are a handful of macros that have been written where people said, I would really like to be able to say blah and have the language do whatever I like. And this is the beauty of macros when we start playing with them. So one of them is somebody decided that this is the syntax they would like to be able to use to look up the hash keys in a table. So here's the syntax. K here is the key that we're looking up, and table is the table that my table is the name of the table that we're looking up. So those two things are variables. And the rest of this is actually the syntax. So loop for being the hash keys of blah blah blah. So this is the actual honest to God syntax for this particular call. And so what happens is in the rest of our function call here, the rest of our loop, we just do whatever it is we want to do with k. So this is going to iterate through all the keys in the table, and on each pass we can do something with k. So in this case, I'm just printing out a message saying, here's the key I was looking up, and here's the value that was associated with it. Right? So we're just going through and printing all the key value pairs. So syntax is a little weird, but it does in fact work. There are a few other varieties. You can do something like that where you're going to say, for each of the keys in the table, so for, usual loop for key being the hash keys of my table, so whatever so again, here key is the variable name, that you're going to use to iterate, and my table is the one that is the hash table we're looking at. Collect is saying build a result of all of the things that come next in the loop. So here, the rest of my beastie here is just key. So what I'm saying is I'm going to collect all of the keys as I run through this loop and build them into a list. I could do something similar and say I want to collect all of the values, right? So get hash key, my table is going to return the value. So this is going to collect all the values associated with the keys. It's going to collect all the values in the table. Or I could say collect, and here, this is what I'm going to collect. All of the lists that are a key and the value. So this is going to get a list of the key value pairs. So you can use collect when you're iterating through a loop like this to go through and say, okay, well, gather up all the results I get as I'm iterating through. So all sorts of things to start playing with if you've got the time and the inclination. One of the other things that we can do is it's not unusual to want to iterate through all of the elements of, or all of the key value pairs, for instance, and run some function on them. Right? I want to go through and print them all in a pretty fashion, or I want to go through and, I don't know, add them all to some other thing. So if I want to run a function on each of the pairs, there's a maphash function. So maphash expects you to pass the name of the function you want to run. So if I have some function foo, I'm going to give it the quote foo, right? So it doesn't try and treat foo as a variable name. It actually knows, okay, this is a symbol, the name of my function. Or you could use things like quote plus or quote minus if you wanted to, if you knew that the key value pairs were appropriate for that. And then whichever table you want to do. So this is going to run through all of the entries in my table and run this function on it. So, interesting possibility there as well. And this kind of an idea, passing functions as parameters to other functions, is something we'll revisit with higher order functions very soon. Let's see, just maybe have a quick play to confirm some of this stuff. So here we've got just a quick example of some of these things. So we're creating, we're calling make hash table, creating a hash table, an empty hash table, storing it in the variable TBL, and then I'm going to go through and set a bunch of values in it. So we'll call gethash, and I'm going to use first as my key and 1 as my value. So I'm saying, okay, I want to associate this value with this key in the table. And again, the keys and the values can be anything you want. So with the string first exclamation mark, I'm going to associate value 1. With the integer 125, I'm going to associate the string key or second. With the list 1, 2, 3, I'm going to associate the list 10, 20, 30. Again, you can use any data types you like. You just want to make sure that all of your keys are unique. Well, I guess if you reuse a key in here, it's just going to update the value associated with it. So then I'm going to try one of these loops. Loop for, and I'm going to use next key as my keyword, being the hash keys of this table that I just filled in, do. And all I'm going to do here is print out the key value pairs. So I'm going to say, okay, well, print out next key and print out the value associated with it. So hopefully this actually works. Yeah, so it's just going to run through and it finds each of the different keys and the associated value. And actually, one of the things you can see is that it's a little tough to predict the order that the sequence. It doesn't necessarily print these out in the order you created them. And actually, that looks pretty close to the reverse order, doesn't it? Yeah. Anyway, so just keep in mind that you're not necessarily, when you're doing things like this, you don't really know what order values are in the hash table. So don't assume that they're in the same sequence that you stuck them in there. All right, that seems like a good place to leave it.